Have you ever wondered why sometimes a woman gets drawn to a man, shows him interest, but then suddenly pulls away, almost as if she rejects the very attraction she created? This is one of the most confusing dynamics men face, and today I'm going to break it down in a way that will completely shift how you see women, attraction, and rejection. Attraction is one of the most misunderstood forces when it comes to human relationships. The initial spark is what brings two people together, what makes a woman notice a man and feel something different around him. That spark could come from the way he carries himself, his confidence, his physical presence, or even the charisma in his words. In that first moment, she is pulled towards him almost against her will, as if her mind and body are responding to something primal. But the spark alone is not enough. In fact, for many women, the spark can be dangerous if it isn't supported by something deeper. That deeper element is emotional safety. Without it, the very spark that drew her in quickly becomes the reason she steps away. A woman might feel her heart race in the beginning, but if the man doesn't create an environment where she feels emotionally secure, that excitement fades and transforms into doubt, confusion, or even fear. You see, emotional safety is not about money, status, or good looks. It is about a woman's subconscious sense that she can be herself around a man without fear of judgment, betrayal, or abandonment. It is about trust at its most fundamental level. A woman can be extremely attracted to a man physically, yet her internal radar is constantly scanning for signals of safety or danger. This radar is deeply connected to her biology and her emotional wiring. She is designed to assess whether a man's presence will protect her or destabilize her. That's why sometimes, even when she is fascinated by a man, she withdraws if she feels that her emotions are not being valued or respected. The initial spark gave her a reason to open the door, but the absence of safety makes her shut it before he can even enter. When a woman first meets an attractive man, her curiosity is sparked. She notices the qualities that stand out, the way he speaks, his confidence, his smile, or even the effortless charm that surrounds him. She may even imagine what being with him might feel like. But the moment they start to interact beyond surface-level attraction, her mind begins testing. She observes his tone, the consistency of his words, the respect in his gestures, and how he handles her emotions, even the smallest ones. If she senses arrogance, insincerity, or emotional unavailability, her system interprets it as unsafe. That unsafe feeling doesn't always come across as a logical thought. It shows up as hesitation, discomfort, or the sudden urge to distance herself. This is why men often feel confused when a woman who seemed very interested in the beginning suddenly rejects them. To the man, nothing has changed. But to her, the shift happened the moment she realized that spark wasn't connected to stability. Emotional safety also means predictability in behavior. If a man appears one way at first but shifts into another version of himself later, perhaps overly needy, possessive, dismissive, or inconsistent, it shakes the foundation of her attraction. The spark no longer feels like a warm light pulling her closer, but rather a fire that could burn her if she gets too close. Women often walk away not because they don't feel attraction, but because they fear what that attraction might cost them emotionally. A woman would rather reject a man she is drawn to than risk being in a connection that threatens her inner peace. That peace is more important than the thrill of chemistry. Even in small interactions, emotional safety is tested. If she shares a vulnerable detail and the man dismisses it or mocks it, she subconsciously marks him as unsafe. If she expresses discomfort and he ignores it, the same judgment forms. On the other hand, if she sees that he listens, respects, and creates space for her emotions, she relaxes. Her attraction then deepens because the spark is no longer just physical. It now has a foundation. Without that foundation, attraction collapses. The man may still look the same, still speak the same, but she feels a barrier inside her heart that prevents her from moving forward. This is why many attractive men struggle with rejection after initial interest. They believe their looks or charisma should be enough to sustain attraction, but for women, safety outweighs sparkle. That spark is only the entry point. It does not guarantee permanence. Women need to feel that the man who excites them is also the man who will not harm them emotionally. Without this assurance, rejection becomes her self-defense mechanism. What confuses men is simply a woman choosing her well-being over her desires. And this is why emotional safety is the invisible filter that decides whether attraction grows or dies. One of the most overlooked reasons why women reject attractive men after initially showing interest is the fear of losing control. At first, when a woman encounters a man who radiates confidence, charm, and physical appeal, she feels drawn to him almost instinctively. His presence stirs emotions she might not have felt in a long time. Her heart beats faster, her thoughts circle around him, and her body language often betrays the attraction even before she consciously acknowledges it. But alongside the thrill of being drawn to such a man, there is also a sudden awareness that she is stepping into vulnerable territory. The very intensity of her attraction makes her feel like she might lose her sense of control over her emotions, her decisions, and even her independence. This fear often becomes the invisible barrier that pushes her to reject him, not because she isn't attracted, but because the attraction feels too powerful. Control is a form of safety for many women. It represents stability, predictability, and the ability to guard their hearts from unnecessary pain. When an attractive man enters her life, especially one who knows the effect he has on women, she feels that control slipping away. His words stay in her mind longer than they should. His presence creates a nervous excitement she can't hide, and she begins to realize how much power he holds over her emotions. For a woman who has worked hard to build emotional independence, this sensation can feel both intoxicating and dangerous. She knows that if she allows herself to fall too deeply, too quickly, she may no longer be the one making rational choices. Instead, she fears becoming someone who waits for his attention, who depends on his validation, or who is willing to compromise her own boundaries just to keep him interested. That thought alone is enough to make her take a step back. The fear of losing control also comes from past experiences. Many women have been in situations where they let attraction guide them, only to be left heartbroken or manipulated. The memory of being powerless in love makes them hyper-aware when a similar dynamic begins to form. If a man's attractiveness feels overwhelming, she might associate it with potential heartbreak waiting ahead. Even if he hasn't given her a single reason to doubt his intentions, her mind replays old lessons and warns her not to fall into the same trap again. Rejecting him becomes her way of protecting herself from what could feel like history repeating itself. The rejection, in this case, is not a judgment on the man, but a defense mechanism against the possibility of losing herself in him. There's also a subtle layer of ego tied to this fear. A woman often values her ability to remain in control of her emotions. When she senses that an attractive man can influence her mood, her thoughts, and even her choices with such intensity, she feels her self-mastery slipping away. That loss of emotional balance feels uncomfortable, even threatening. She begins to question whether she is still the strong, independent version of herself, or if she is being reduced to someone who simply reacts to his presence. Rejecting him allows her to reclaim that sense of control, to remind herself that no matter how strong the attraction is, she can still dictate the direction of her emotional life. What makes this fear even stronger is the unpredictability of men who are highly attractive. Women know that such men are often desired by many, and this multiplies the risk of being hurt. The fear is not only about losing control to him, but also about losing control in a competitive environment where she might not feel secure in his loyalty. The thought of investing herself fully into a man who could easily walk away with someone else becomes unbearable. Even if he shows genuine interest, the internal voice whispers that his desirability makes him a risk. Rather than surrender control and face the possibility of rejection later, she chooses to reject him first. This fear of losing control is powerful because it is deeply tied to survival instincts. For a woman, giving her emotions over to a man is not a casual decision. It is a risk that could affect her sense of self, her stability, and her future. The stronger the attraction, the bigger the risk feels. And when the risk feels too overwhelming, her natural reaction is to withdraw, to retreat to the safety of her own control, rather than gamble it away on someone who has the power to shake her world so completely. Testing authenticity is one of the most common yet least understood reasons why a woman may initially show interest in a man only to later reject him. When a woman meets an attractive man, the first spark is often instant. She notices his looks, the way he carries himself, his confidence, or the subtle charm in his personality. But once that spark is established, her focus quickly shifts to something deeper. She begins to look beyond the surface, trying to figure out whether what she sees is real or just an act. Attraction may open the door, but it does not guarantee she will walk through it. For her, the question becomes, is this man genuinely the person he appears to be, or is he wearing a mask that will eventually fall off? And this is where testing authenticity begins. A woman tests authenticity not always in deliberate or calculated ways. Much of it happens subconsciously. She notices the little things, the details that reveal whether a man's behavior is consistent. Does he speak with confidence but then act insecure when she pulls away slightly? Does he present himself as caring and respectful, yet dismiss her opinions in subtle ways? Does he claim to value honesty but avoid direct answers when she asks simple questions? These small cracks in authenticity register with her far more than most men realize. What feels like harmless inconsistency to him is, to her, a sign that he may not be who he portrays himself to be. And once that doubt creeps in, attraction begins to weaken. The reason authenticity matters so much is because women often fear being deceived by appearances. An attractive man already has the power to stir her emotions, and with that comes vulnerability. If she invests in him only to discover later that his confidence was a cover for insecurity or his charm was a tool for manipulation, the emotional cost for her would be high. That's why women instinctively test for authenticity early on. It is their way of protecting themselves before they become too invested. A woman would rather reject a man at the first sign of inconsistency than risk being blindsided months later by a reality she didn't expect. This rejection is not always about him being unattractive or unworthy, but about her unwillingness to invest in something that doesn't feel real. These tests can take many forms. She may withdraw her attention slightly to see if he becomes desperate or maintains his composure. She may bring up a topic that challenges his perspective to see if he can stand his ground respectfully or if he becomes defensive. She may share a personal detail and watch how he responds, not to the detail itself, but to the vulnerability behind it. Each of these moments provides her with data. If he reacts in alignment with the image he projected at the beginning, she feels reassured. But if he breaks character, she feels exposed to potential disappointment, and that exposure triggers rejection. What looks to men like mixed signals from women is often just the outcome of these subconscious tests of authenticity. The irony is that many men fail these tests not because they are bad people, but because they are trying too hard to impress. They may exaggerate their achievements, mask their insecurities, or act more confident than they truly feel. While this works in the short term to spark attraction, it rarely survives the scrutiny of authenticity. Women are highly intuitive, and when something feels off, they don't need evidence to pull away. Their instincts alone are enough. What this means is that the very effort to seem more attractive than they are often becomes the reason women reject them later. A man who is consistently himself, even if imperfect, passes more tests than the man who creates a polished image but cannot sustain it. At the core, testing authenticity is a woman's way of answering a simple question. Can I trust this man with my emotions? If the answer feels uncertain, she withdraws, no matter how much she was initially drawn to him. For her, authenticity is not a luxury. It is the foundation upon which attraction is built. If that foundation wobbles, she walks away. That's why a woman's rejection after showing interest often has less to do with superficial attraction and more to do with whether the man's reality matches the impression he created when she first noticed him. Subconscious standards play a huge role in why women sometimes reject men they initially show interest in, even when the attraction between them feels undeniable. At first, when a woman meets a man who is physically appealing, charismatic, or confident, she may feel a rush of excitement and curiosity. She notices the qualities that stand out, the things that make him different from others, and that magnetic pull sparks her interest. But what happens beneath the surface is far more complex. Attraction works on multiple layers, and while the surface level spark is immediate, her subconscious is quietly measuring him against a set of deeper, often unspoken standards. These standards are not always consciously chosen. They are shaped by upbringing, culture, personal values, and past experiences. They act like a hidden filter, and if he doesn't align with them, even if he excites her, she feels compelled to step back. Every woman carries within her an internal framework of what she believes is acceptable, desirable, and safe in a partner. Some of these standards come from family values. If she was raised in an environment where stability, respect, and responsibility were emphasized, her subconscious will automatically screen for these traits in men. On the other hand, if she grew up witnessing betrayal, chaos, or inconsistency, her standards may be even stricter because she fears repeating those patterns. When she meets an attractive man, her mind is not only registering how good he looks or how confident he seems, but also asking, does he fit the image of the kind of man I can trust, the kind of man I can see myself with long term, or is he just a temporary thrill? If her subconscious feels a clash between attraction and her standards, she will lean toward her standards every time, because to her, those standards equal survival and long-term well-being. This is why sometimes a woman may openly enjoy the attention of an attractive man, but eventually withdraw. To the man, it may feel sudden and confusing, but for her, the decision is tied to an inner voice that reminds her what she truly wants and needs. For instance, she may feel strongly drawn to a man who is adventurous, spontaneous, and full of charm. Yet if her subconscious standard requires stability, responsibility, or a certain kind of seriousness, she won't allow herself to get too invested. She knows that the initial spark could lead her into a situation where her deeper needs are not met. Rejecting him, even after showing interest, becomes a way of protecting her alignment with her own values. Sometimes these subconscious standards are influenced by cultural or social conditioning. A woman may find herself deeply attracted to a man, but if he does not align with her cultural background, religious beliefs, or family expectations, she may sense that pursuing the connection will create internal conflict later. This conflict often feels too heavy to carry, so she withdraws before it grows. In her mind, attraction alone is not enough to outweigh the pressure of her inner and outer expectations. Even if she doesn't consciously articulate these standards in the moment, her actions reflect them. She may smile, flirt, and even entertain the connection at first, but once her subconscious filter tells her this doesn't fit her long-term picture, she pulls away. Past experiences also strengthen these subconscious standards. If a woman once trusted a man who seemed exciting but later caused her pain, her subconscious becomes sharper at screening similar patterns in future men. Even if the new man hasn't shown any red flags, she may still feel uneasy if his energy reminds her of that past hurt. Her standards tighten as a result of her past wounds, and no matter how strong her attraction, she finds herself unable to ignore those silent alarms. To an outside observer, it may look like she is being overly cautious or dismissive, but to her, it is a matter of self-preservation. Attraction can make her curious, but it cannot override the lessons her subconscious has already internalized. What makes subconscious standards so powerful is that they are often stronger than conscious desires. A woman may consciously say she wants a certain type of man, adventurous, charismatic, or bold, but if her subconscious standards demand emotional safety, loyalty, or stability, she will eventually reject anyone who doesn't fit that deeper mold. This is why men sometimes feel puzzled when women walk away, despite clear signs of attraction. It's not that the attraction wasn't real, it's that the subconscious standards acted like a checkpoint and stopped the connection from moving forward. For the woman, those standards ensure she doesn't lose herself in the thrill of chemistry only to regret it later. They serve as a protective compass, guiding her decisions even when her heart wants to wander in another direction. Fear of intensity is one of the hidden reasons why women sometimes pull away from men they were initially drawn to. When a connection feels too strong, too fast, it can create an emotional weight that feels overwhelming rather than exciting. At first, a woman might enjoy the thrill of a man who sparks strong feelings in her. His presence feels magnetic, his energy stirs her emotions, and the chemistry between them is undeniable. But very quickly, that same intensity can transform into something frightening. It isn't always because she doubts the man himself, but because she doubts her ability to handle emotions that rise too quickly and too powerfully. Attraction that escalates without balance can feel less like romance and more like losing control of one's emotional stability, and that makes her retreat. For many women, intensity in relationships feels like stepping into a fire. It is warm, passionate, and alive, but it is also unpredictable and potentially consuming. When she meets a man who makes her heart race, who occupies her thoughts more than she expected, she might feel an alarm ringing inside. The alarm tells her that this level of emotion could lead to disappointment, heartbreak, or a loss of independence if it continues unchecked. That's why, despite the spark, she chooses to step away. The attraction is real, but the fear of being consumed by it outweighs her desire to stay. She does not want to become so invested so quickly that she loses her ability to think rationally or maintain her boundaries. The fear of intensity often comes from past experiences. If a woman has been in a relationship before where she gave too much of herself too soon, she remembers the pain of being left vulnerable. She remembers the sleepless nights, the anxiety, and the sense of emptiness when that relationship didn't last. So when she feels a similar intensity rising with someone new, her subconscious steps in to protect her. Even if the new man has done nothing wrong, she associates that feeling of being swept away with eventual loss. Her instinct becomes better to reject early than to risk falling so deeply that recovery becomes painful. It's not about whether the man is worthy or not. It's about her emotional memory warning her not to go too far, too fast. There is also a practical side to this fear. Intense connections often blur judgment. When emotions are running high, people ignore red flags, compromise on values, or make decisions they later regret. A woman who has learned this lesson in the past may become cautious the moment she feels her emotions overpowering her logic. She might think, if I continue with this man, I might overlook things that truly matter, just because the chemistry feels so strong right now. Rather than risk making impulsive choices, she creates distance. Rejecting him becomes a way to regain her balance, to remind herself that love should not come at the cost of clarity or self-control. Sometimes this fear is not about the man at all, but about her own readiness. A woman may feel that she is not in the right stage of life to handle a relationship that feels so emotionally charged. She may be focused on her career, personal growth, or healing from past wounds, and the thought of entering something so intense feels destabilizing. Even if she admires and desires the man, she senses that the timing isn't right. The fear of intensity here is tied to the fear of distraction, of being pulled away from the path she knows she needs to follow for herself. She would rather reject him than risk losing sight of her own priorities. Intensity also challenges identity. When a woman meets a man who evokes powerful emotions, she begins to see herself differently in his presence. That shift can be thrilling, but also unsettling. She may question whether she is becoming too dependent on him for her happiness, whether she is changing in ways she cannot control, or whether she is giving up pieces of herself without realizing it. This internal questioning adds to the fear. Instead of celebrating the depth of emotion, she interprets it as a sign of danger. Attraction that should have deepened now triggers withdrawal, all because the emotional flame feels too strong to safely handle. At its core, the fear of intensity is about the human instinct to protect oneself from extremes. While intensity can bring closeness and passion, it can also expose a person to risks that feel unbearable. For women, especially, who are often taught to guard their hearts carefully, this fear acts as a shield. It makes them cautious even when the attraction is undeniable, and it drives them to reject men they otherwise might have wanted to pursue. Ego and validation are powerful forces that quietly shape the way women respond to attraction, and they often explain why a woman might initially show interest in a man only to later reject him. Attraction doesn't always begin from a place of genuine desire for connection. Sometimes it begins from the subtle need to feel seen, admired, or validated. When a woman notices an attractive man, she may be curious to see if she can capture his attention. The spark she feels is not only about him, it's also about the reflection she sees of herself in his interest. If she succeeds in gaining his attention, her ego is boosted, her sense of self-worth feels affirmed, and she enjoys the rush of knowing that someone desirable desires her in return. But once that validation is secured, the need that drove the attraction in the first place is satisfied, and her interest may suddenly fade. What looks like rejection to the man is, in reality, her moving on from an interaction that already served its purpose. This dynamic often plays out in subtle, subconscious ways. Many women don't deliberately approach men with the intention of seeking validation, but the process happens naturally. Society places immense pressure on women to be attractive, to be chosen, and to be admired. This constant social conditioning can create an inner hunger for reassurance. When an attractive man notices her, compliments her, or shows clear interest, it temporarily feeds that hunger. She feels a surge of confidence and significance, a confirmation that she is valuable and desirable. Yet once that emotional void has been filled, she may no longer feel the same need to continue engaging with him. The man who thought the interaction was the beginning of something deeper is left confused when she suddenly withdraws. To him, her rejection feels personal. To her, it is simply the natural conclusion of an exchange that gave her what she subconsciously sought in the first place. There is also a layer of power involved in this process. When a woman captures the attention of a man who is seen as attractive, charming, or high value, she feels a certain sense of accomplishment. It reassures her that she can hold her ground in a world where competition for male attention is often unspoken, but very real. This moment of power strengthens her ego, and the thrill of achieving it sometimes outweighs the desire to maintain the actual connection. In other words, the chase was never about the man himself, but about what securing his interest symbolized for her. Once that symbol has served its purpose, she steps back, leaving the man to wonder what went wrong. The rejection in this sense is not a rejection of him as a person, but of the idea that she needs him beyond the validation he provided. For some women, validation through male attention functions almost like a cycle. Whenever they feel uncertain about their self-image, they may seek out interactions that boost their confidence. This is not always done consciously, but it becomes a pattern. Feel a void, seek validation, receive attention, then lose interest once the ego is satisfied. Attractive men often find themselves caught in this cycle because their attention carries more weight. It feels like a bigger win. But the same intensity that makes their interest so flattering also makes it easier for a woman to walk away once she has collected the affirmation she needed. The moment he expresses clear interest, the game is over, and with it, her curiosity fades. This is not to say that all women approach attraction from a place of ego, but it is undeniable that validation plays a role in many interactions. It explains why a woman who flirts openly, who seems excited to engage, might suddenly turn cold when the man responds with genuine interest. The energy shifts the moment she realizes that she has secured his attention. What began as a thrill of possibility becomes, in her mind, a completed task. Without the challenge of winning him over, the excitement dies, and without the excitement, she withdraws. The man mistakes this for rejection, when in fact it is simply the closing of a loop she began when her ego needed reinforcement. At a deeper level, this behavior is also about protection. By seeking validation without allowing the connection to deepen, she avoids the risks of vulnerability. She can enjoy the sweetness of being wanted without facing the pain of potential loss or disappointment. In her mind, she got what she came for without having to pay the emotional cost of commitment. That is why, despite the initial spark, she may reject the man once the validation is secured. To her, the interaction is complete. To him, it feels unfinished. And that is where the misunderstanding lies. Mismatch in masculine energy is one of the most subtle yet powerful reasons why women may initially show interest in a man, but later reject him. At first glance, attraction can be immediate. She notices his looks, his confidence, his aura, and something in her response. But once the initial spark fades, what matters most is not just the surface level appeal, but the deeper energy he carries. Masculine energy in its healthy form is about stability, presence, direction, and confidence without arrogance. It is the kind of energy that allows a woman to relax into her feminine side, to feel safe, and to trust the flow of the connection. When this energy is misaligned, when it is inconsistent, weak, overbearing, or needy, the attraction she once felt begins to crumble. A woman may not always be able to articulate it clearly, but she feels it instinctively. The energy is off. And when the energy is off, she withdraws. The challenge is that many men believe attraction can be maintained simply by continuing to look good or saying the right things. But energy is something a woman experiences beyond words and appearances. For example, if a man appears confident during the first meeting but later becomes overly needy for her validation, the shift in energy becomes glaring. She no longer feels his groundedness. Instead, she feels pressure. What started as admiration for his presence now feels like responsibility to constantly reassure him. That shift drains her attraction because it signals to her that his masculine energy is not stable enough to hold space for her. She begins to sense that being with him would mean carrying the emotional weight. And for many women, that imbalance is a clear reason to pull away. On the other extreme, some men confuse masculine energy with dominance or control. They mistake being strong for being controlling, being confident for being dismissive, or being protective for being possessive. At first, a woman may mistake this intensity for passion or strength, but soon she begins to feel suffocated. Instead of feeling safe in his presence, she feels diminished. Masculine energy that lacks balance becomes threatening rather than comforting. And because attraction for women is deeply tied to how a man makes her feel in his presence, this distortion of energy creates a silent barrier. Even if she was drawn to him in the beginning, she rejects him later because she realizes that his energy doesn't allow her to flourish as herself. It only restricts her. Consistency is another crucial part of masculine energy. A man who projects strength in one moment but collapses into insecurity in the next creates confusion. Women naturally look for signals of stability because stability equals safety. If his energy fluctuates wildly, confident one day, distant the next, affectionate at times but cold at others, she reads that inconsistency as emotional instability. Her subconscious tells her that relying on him would be risky. She might still find him attractive on the surface, but the mismatch between her need for steady masculine energy and his inconsistent presence makes her step back. She may not explain it this way, but she feels it strongly. She cannot trust his energy. And without trust, attraction loses its foundation. It's important to understand that masculine energy is not about being emotionless or hard. In fact, women appreciate men who are vulnerable and expressive. But there is a difference between vulnerability and dependency. When a man shares his feelings in a grounded way, it enhances connection. When he clings to her for emotional reassurance, it drains her. The distinction lies in whether his energy remains steady even when he is open. If his openness turns into neediness, the polarity between masculine and feminine collapses. She no longer feels pulled toward him. Instead, she feels the need to protect herself from being emotionally drained. That loss of polarity is one of the key reasons women walk away from men they were once interested in. Ultimately, mismatch in masculine energy is not about how a man looks or what he says. It is about the invisible force he carries in every interaction. A woman can feel when a man's energy invites her into deeper connection versus when it destabilizes her. She can feel when his presence allows her to trust versus when it forces her to guard herself. And no matter how attractive he may be on the outside, if his energy does not align with what she subconsciously seeks, she will choose to reject him. This is why so many men are puzzled when women withdraw without clear explanation. It is not always about something tangible. It is about an energetic mismatch she cannot ignore, even if she doesn't fully understand it herself.